Thank you for listening to another episode of the Rogue Patriot, where we are taking back the word patriot. Today we've got a very fitting episode for this show, defending basic American values. What we got, Selena?
So today we are going to discuss this thing I keep hearing about that keeps occurring in the media about Trump talking about a third term and that he's entitled to it, or that he deserves it, rather. Yeah, that's...
Yeah.
It's funny.
Yeah. So, yeah, I first heard him say this maybe a year ago or more than that, and he was saying it in the sense of like, oh, well, this will really freak the media out. This will really piss everybody off.
Yeah.
And he was saying it like very jokingly like that.
Yeah.
Which
you mean
is
testing
not,
the waters?
Yeah, exactly. That's not something that you do when you're in a position of extreme power. But over the past few months, it has gotten way more serious than that. He's brought this up frequently and is starting to cite these reasons as to why he is owed another opportunity and all of this kind of stuff.
And I think that probably is because of his followers. They follow him so hardcore that if he repeats something enough, he's brainwashed them into believing whatever he wants. They pretty much stick by his side no matter what dumb shit comes out of his mouth.
Yeah.
So if he goes ahead and starts talking about it now, they'll go ahead and be like, yeah, President Trump deserves this. I can stick with him forever, Yeah. And he knows that. There's a bunch of blind, ignorant people that are in his little groupie, his little followers clique. So yeah, but I have to say, I did hear about this when Obama was actually in office. Something that the Republicans, the extremists on the right side, they would say such hateful things about Obama. Like they couldn't stand him, which, okay, that's their preference, but they would say things like he was the Antichrist and all this kind of stuff. But one of the things that they pushed besides that, was that he was going to stay in a third term. And when he didn't fight leaving after his second term, and Trump was elected and Obama was just like, hey, I ran for president, now I can go play golf and be free of, political burden. And he didn't fight staying in a third term like these extremists swore up and down. And I mean, I know a few extremists.
Oh, I remember.
They were, he is gonna be in for a third term. Just watch. And it was such a big deal. He was gonna break the Second Amendment because, Republicans are very, supposedly American and very strong on their beliefs of sticking to what their rights are and the amendments and everything.
That was 22nd Amendment, not second. Sorry, go ahead.
No, did I say second? I'm not sorry. Yeah. What I'm meaning is they fight for their Second Amendment so much on guns and stuff. Right. And this was another one, the 22nd Amendment, about them not running for a third term. So it was this huge deal to them that Obama would want to go against that. And that was their argument, is that it's against the 22nd Amendment. So they would complain about Obama on that. Obama didn't fight leaving the office when Trump got in. And yet they were still just hell-bent on this, talking about, oh, well, he's going to come back. Just wait and see. Just watch. And then when Trump started being investigated after the election, and he became president, their thing was, oh, well, see, this is Obama, having him looked into. What's going to happen is they're going to try to impeach Trump, and then Obama's going to be right back in the office. And that has yet to happen. I think we're still stuck with Trump as our president. I don't think Obama's done that. But Republicans were very, very big on this. And it's mind-boggling to me that their reasoning over Obama was that it's not allowed. It's against the 22nd Amendment. But here you have a Republican president that they blindly follow. And I haven't heard a peep out of the Republicans, especially the extremists, on talking about, hey, he's talking about a third term. That is against the 22nd Amendment. So is it okay for a Republican president to say that they're going to run for a third term, but what, not a Democrat? republic? I mean, or president? Like, is that the thing? Is that what we're going off of? Or does it actually piss Republicans off if the amendment is broken for any president to suggest that they are entitled to a third term? Because Trump's just an entitled, spoiled, rotten, rich brat. That's how he's entitled. But he does not deserve a third term. I mean, that's why we have this 22nd Amendment. No President Obama didn't. Trump didn't. No one did.
That's the big point there. No president, no aspect of the government is deserving of operating outside the Constitution. And this is such a great topic for this show, because the whole point of this show is talking about actual patriotic American values, what it actually means to be a patriot. And what we have now, and I see this all the time on Facebook and Instagram, is there is the cult of personality around Trump has stolen that word and is parading it around, and it's false, obviously.
Yeah.
So look, the Constitution, if you are a patriot or if you are patriotic, the Constitution should be the most revered document for you.
Which means you're not just paying attention to the gun rights. It's not just the second one. You are paying attention to all of them.
And you're not just paying attention to them when it's comfortable. You're paying attention to them when it's not.
Yeah.
Specifically. So when people may or may not be protesting something you agree or don't agree with, they still have the right to do that.
That right. Exactly.
That is patriotism.
And it's how this country was actually built. And it's how we fought against the British. It's how we broke away from a kingdom. Is we did do riots. We protested and stuff. So even when it was uncomfortable, brave women and men went and made a difference.
Yes,
that's what they did.
And incredibly strong leaders at the time defended their right to do that, even when it was going against them. And that's something in early American history under George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, those three in particular, the country was really, really angry. And there were all these factions because, look, man, this country is founded on guns and whiskey and tobacco and the West. I mean, this is like, we are a hot-headed group of people. And at the time, in the 1790s and early 1800s, nobody agreed with how the government was being formed. Nobody liked it. And so
it took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. Like, it wasn't just an easy path. It was...
Oh, my God, no. It took...
so many lives lost, everything.
Yeah. The revolution started in 1776. The Constitution wasn't ratified until 1791. So there was a document in between there called the Articles of Confederation that was going to be what the Constitution is now. But it was so restrictive, it didn't allow the government to function at all. The government couldn't levy any taxes for anything, for military, to regulate trade, to do anything. It was really, really bare bones. So they had to change it. Well, that process of changing it took 15 years to get that through. So there was a period of time when the country first started, there was 15 years of basically no government. Where we were all figuring it out. And during that time, there was still rioting and looting and protests and fires and all kinds armed skirmishes, all kinds of stuff. And the people who were in leadership at that time were strong enough and brave enough to allow people to act that way, even though it was going against what they wanted to do. That's one of the things. American leadership can be defined as people not exercising their immense power when they have the ability to do so, and choosing not to exercise that power because it's better for the democracy for the people just to work it out amongst themselves.
Yeah,
and figure it out.
I think that explains in detail and in a very good way of freedom. That's
right. That's the basis.
What this country is supposed to be, and it's freedom. That's a good way of explaining that, people in power were not abusing their power and still letting people have that freedom, practice that freedom, which is what people came over here for. It's why this country was started. Yeah.
So now, as it relates to the presidential term limits specifically, and I'm sure a lot of people are talking about this because Trump has made it such big news. And one person who deserves a phenomenal amount of credit for predicting this is Bill Maher. He has been talking about this for maybe since 2017, saying, look, Trump's not going to leave. He's not going to be satisfied
He's a
with
rich, entitled brat. He thinks he deserves the throne.
Yeah, the vibe of a monarchy is stronger with him than with any other president.
Yeah, and that's not like my political views of, oh, he's Republican, I don't like him. It's not if I don't care if he's Republican or Democrat. He is obviously, like, even before being a president. Again, I heard someone say that he was the other day I heard someone say, and I know I said this on another podcast, that he was America's darling. I never heard that before.
No, that's nonsense.
I had never heard that. I had heard people when he had that show on TV that he was this rich, pompous ass.
Yeah.
And everyone could see him as this rich, pompous ass, this entitled, spoiled, rotten, rich brat. And he's acting that way as president. And would you expect any different from someone, as the Republicans say, is, oh, I like him, he's brave, he says what he means to people? No, he is unprofessional, and he does not stick to the normal guidelines of having a political or high-powered political position. And that is just to maintain a certain way about you that's respectful, and he never has. He's never followed those guidelines, and people have always praised him for it, and now he's even willing to say, hey, I'll actually break an amendment, I don't care, and you know what, my followers are going to support me in it.
Yeah, he famously, when he was running for the Republican nomination in 2016, said that he could shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue in New York, and nobody would blame him for it.
Exactly.
Nobody would do anything about it. And yeah, all you have to do is just keep saying something over and over again, and a bunch of people are going to believe it. So where this came from, where did this norm come from of presidents having 2 terms? So the way that, like I said, I know a bunch of people are going to be talking about this, but we'll do it quickly anyway. So where this all came from, the Constitution was written to be a living document and to change as the needs of American society changed. And so the way that the founders wrote that into the Constitution was with the Bill of Rights. So the Bill of Rights started with 10 amendments, and these were considered amendments to the Constitution that were protecting certain individual civil liberties. And the founders wrote a process for adding amendments to the Constitution. So that is the part that can be modified as necessary. Things can be added to it. There's no way to remove things, but you can add things to nullify other things. So anyway, presidents always served up to 2 terms because that was the standard set by George Washington. George Washington specifically wanted to set that standard because the idea of, at the time, most leaders were in power until they died. And that was something that he and the founders, the other founders of the country, wanted to be an example against. Because having power, it's kind of like the Supreme Court justices. They are on the bench for as long as they want to until they die. Is that a good thing? Not really. I mean, you get people that
it's kind of like having a king, a monarchy.
It is. And so they didn't want to set that standard. So George Washington it's really difficult to convey how revolutionary this was at the time. Nobody did this in the 1700s, in 1800s. We were the first to peacefully, number one, for a leader to decide to no longer be a leader anymore, to give up that power. Nobody ever did that. But then number 2, he did not pick the next president. It was a free election. It was a free and fair election, and he ceded power to whoever won that election. That was like the cornerstone of the founding of the country, was that fundamental way of handling power. And it is a way of not being greedy with this power.
Which is exactly
humility.
what Trump is doing, is being greedy. That example right there of founding fathers doing stuff like that, that's what makes this country so great. That people doing stuff like that, it was amazing in those times for stuff like that to be passed, for them to fight for stuff like that and to give up their own power to someone else. this country was founded on people making sure that this country could be as great as it could be for everyone.
Yes.
And now you have someone like Trump who's just a greedy person, and people are backing him while saying they're patriots and that they, you know, believe in the original ideology of America. And that's the exact opposite. Who you voted in is doing the exact opposite of what the American standards actually are or should be. It's what they were. It doesn't seem like what they are anymore.
Right. And this is something I get real emotional about, because to me I just said it. That is what makes America so special, is starting that way. And anybody who has the fucking audacity to call themselves a patriot and not call this shit out should be charged with treason. And really anybody who has this idea should be charged with treason, because this is not a suggestion as to like, hey, I think the country would be better if there were no presidential term limits, or if the term limits were 3 instead of 2 terms, or something like that. No, this is I deserve it. I'm entitled to this. And it's a power grab. And you know what? If he's not serious,
that's also how you get dictators.
Yes, that is exactly how. And that is exactly what has happened in Russia most recently, where they actually just changed the constitution. And what they've done there with Putin is they have changed it to where instead of saying, oh, anybody can be president for as long as they want, no. What he's done is every time his terms are up, he figures out a way to reset the clock and just start the terms again and again. And now he's set it up. He was elected in 2000 to be Russia's president. He has set it up to where you were only supposed to be president for, I think, a maximum of 8 years in Russia. He could be president until 2035 now, or until his death. And that would likely be around the time of his death, because he's that old.
I love that. Speaking of Russia, my whole time growing up, if anybody mentioned Russia, it was, oh my gosh, spit on it. Ew, Russia. But it seems like Republicans have this better idea of Russia now. Like, oh, I'd rather live in Russia than deal with this. And that was not a thing. As a matter of fact, growing up around a bunch of Republicans, they were always fucking hating on Russia. I mean, they hated Russia.
Yes.
And now Trump's president and he's buddy-buddy with them. And you can't tell me he's not, because these Republicans are, ooh, yeah, Russia's good.
Now that point is important. And that highlights the difference between the cult of personality around Trump and the Republican Party. Because if you take any of the main players in the Republican Party in Congress, in the Senate, for example, like Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, maybe Mitch McConnell, but he's just so useless. Fuck him. Like, there's no point in even guessing with him. But you take those guys and, take your pick from the House as well. They still feel that way about Russia. The old, they're relatively young people. They haven't been in the Republican Party 40 years. They're not old enough for that, but they are the kind of standard of the Republican Party before Trump. They still feel the same way about Russia, but they're all terrified to death of Trump, so they will not say anything. Yeah,
where does this if he's such a great guy and he's making America great again, and he believes in the idea of America being free and everything, like you Republicans that are just such great patriots believe in, is that freedom. Where's this terror coming from this person?
I think it's because they don't understand why he can get people to do whatever he wants and agree with him on anything. I think they don't understand it, and it scares the hell out of them.
Yeah, well, the only reason he can get people to agree to things are people who are weak, and he's an asshole. He just said, if you're loud enough, it's like the bullies in school. If you're loud enough, you get what you want. And that's all he is loud and pitching a fit. Picture his face on a baby in a baby bed pitching a fit and shaking its, little toy at the world.
He also knows how to take advantage of the media cycle, which is why really he was elected initially. He speaks in sound bites. The things that he says, the way he says them, and the things that he tweets are very easy for people to understand. And you can be really, really stupid and understand it. Alleged, they'll think they understand it. Yeah. And I think that's where it comes from. These other guys are career lawyers and politicians. They're academics. And that's what a lot of people in Congress are. And so they don't have that same connection to dumb language.
Well,
basically.
I think it's also that dumb language was a lot of hate at the beginning of him trying
That
to run
too.
for president and everything. If you look at what he stood for, it was, protect our borders, but it was in a way to attack Hispanics, like Mexicans and stuff like that, people from Mexico. And then if you look at his most recent with China, it's very, if you don't want to call it racist, don't call it racist, but it's very hateful towards an ethnicity or hateful towards a group of people and spewing out that hate. And then everybody's like, oh, there's someone else like me that's hateful, because people can't seem to make political decisions without there being a bunch of hate and arguing and everything. And I think he knew to pinpoint in on that.
Yep.
Especially with Republicans already being mad that we had a Democrat that was, a black president. So they were already hateful over that. So it was really easy to light a match under their ass, get that fire going. I think that had to do with it partially. Was that. So with the 22nd Amendment, how did that come about? Stopping it from being allowed to do a third term.
Right. So so George Washington set the standard for each president serving only 2 terms. And that was not written anywhere. That was just the norm. That was precedent. And that held through until FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was first elected in 1933. So 1933, we were not doing that great as a country. So World War I had the American involvement in the war ended in 1918. That really took a huge toll economically on the country and in a few other ways. And the fighting in World War II in Europe started around 1935. The Americans were not involved until much later, though. And so that's kind of painting your picture of what was going on in the world. So FDR was a liberal president. He was a Democrat and is basically the founder of the modern Democratic Party platform. And so he was first elected in 1933, and he was the first president to seek more than 2 terms. And he ran a third time and won, and died, I think, a year into that term, something like that. And that was the first time that had happened. And I have not done a massive amount of research into what was going on in the country at that time as to like what brought that about. If he was just an egomaniac or kind of where that came from. I know that he was, his term would have expired in the middle of World War II, of the U.S. involvement in World War II. And people are very likely to re-elect a wartime president for a second term. And you can see that presidents that have been what's called wartime presidents, where a war has started in their first term, they almost always get reelected for a second term. People like that continuation of leadership when there's a war going on. Unfortunately, the most recent one has gone on over 3 presidents, which is pretty crazy, and that's never happened before. But so we were right in where stuff was really nasty in World War II for the world and America in particular as well. That's when his second term expired. I would imagine that was the defining factor as to why he ran for and won a third term. But anyway, so after that, a lot of people did not like that, and as they shouldn't have, because if we were alive at the time, I know I would be saying the same thing I'm saying about Trump right now, because my assessment of why he wants a third term, has nothing to do with his character. It's fundamentally not constitutional. At the time with FDR, this 22nd Amendment did not exist yet. So it wasn't unconstitutional then, but it was breaking a pretty significant precedent in the country.
Yeah, and I think people would agree that, he shouldn't have ran for a third term. But if Republicans agree, it would be because he's liberal, because they're not arguing with it over Donald Trump right now. So obviously they're fine with someone running for a third term, just not if you're liberal or Democrat.
And now that said, in defense of a lot of the rank and file Republicans, I have not heard anybody I've not heard any serious Republican defend Trump's defend any of his statements talking about a third term.
I'm not saying they're defending it, but I'm saying if it
they're
was
not doing much about it.
If it was Obama or Hillary or Bill, or it'd be this huge deal. It'd be the Antichrist.
The four
it would
horsemen.
be, and it would be bringing up the 22nd Amendment because they love bringing up the amendments.
Yeah,
they
exactly.
Republicans love doing that. I'm not saying that they agree with Trump, but they sure as hell are not disagreeing with it, which means it's going to become more of a popular opinion. No one's going to fight against it, and he knows that. He knows he can be whatever way he wants to be. But speaking of Franklin D. Roosevelt, so he basically had his presidency in the Depression.
Yeah, Depression and World War II.
Yeah. Well, don't say that too much on this podcast because then Trump will want to start a depression to make sure that he can try for a third term. Because I could see him trying to fight for that to make sure that he could get in for a third term because he already thinks he's entitled to it.
There's a lot of extremists on the left now that are saying that he's going to start some kind of armed conflict before the election.
I definitely think so. He definitely uses police for his own benefit, and the fact that he can use the word entitled to something and Republicans didn't pitch a fit when they're always talking about these snowflakes people and these people always being entitled. Yeah, they're entitlements.
Yes.
Republicans always bitch about that. But this one actually uses that he's calling himself entitled to it, and the Republicans are just fine with it.
Yeah, he stole.
Or they're not
Republican
arguing
Party.
against it, rather.
Yeah. He stole the Republican Party, and the people who think that he is actually like a true 100% Reagan-esque Republican.
Oh, he's got his
suckers.
baseball cap on. One he's never worn before
Exactly.
until presidency.
Exactly.
But he
They're
got that
the
damn
suckers.
baseball cap on that I can't stand.
Yeah. So that's kind of where we're at constitutionally. That the 22nd Amendment was passed after FDR, I think in 1947 or so. And so it was passed in 1947 and officially ratified in 1951, which it is really difficult to pass a constitutional amendment. So people must have really felt strongly at the time that this is not cool. We cannot continue this. And that was FDR only served a year into that third term before he died because he was a polio victim. So he was wheelchair bound and, so his health wasn't great. So he didn't get a full 12 years in office. He only got 9 or something like that. So look, what's really frustrating to me about this as well is there's another show that's coming out where we talk about the actual founding of the Republican Party and what it means to be Republican. And we talk about how the baseline of the Republican Party, the founding ideology is essentially strict adherence to the Constitution. What is this exactly not? Strict adherence to the Constitution.
Exactly.
The 20 amendments are not negotiable on the Constitution. That's not how it works. They are every bit as valid as anything else. So the 22nd Amendment is every bit as valid as the second or the first or the fourth or anything like that. But what's really interesting here is that there are plenty of ways that Democrats, or rather, there are plenty of amendments that Democrats kind of fudge around as well, but I don't think as many as Republicans, for sure. For example, the Fourth Amendment is the right to be protected from an unlawful search and seizure. Well, the anti-police riots are about that issue specifically in a lot of cases, and there's not a whole lot of Republican sympathy on that. Yep. And it is directly in violation of one of the original constitutional amendments.
Yep.
So not so much on the whole party of the Constitution thing there yet again. Yeah. So this is a bummer, and I'm not really sure how it's going to turn out. Nobody is. But actually, there was one other thing I wanted to bring up. So earlier in our conversation, I mentioned that no serious Republicans had shown support for Trump talking about running for a third term. I think most of them realize what kind of a poison pill that is, except for a man named Roger Stone. Now, Roger Stone, his history in politics is super long and crazy, But and I'm not going to go into it because it's just too much. It's too much. He is like the definition of a scumbag grifter in politics, and his origins came around. He helped Nixon during Watergate, so his foundation is in government corruption. Is in enabling government corruption.
Let me guess. He's an old white dude.
Yeah, absolutely. An
old white
guy.
Dudes love being in power, man. I don't know.
Yeah.
Every president we have is like old, white, and sick.
Yeah. Now Roger, has never run for elected office. What he does, and this is where the real power in American politics lies, it's not in the people who are elected. Because once you get elected to an office, you either have to keep getting elected, like if you're a senator, or you get elected, serve your terms, and then you're gone. That power goes away. That's not good enough for people like Roger Stone. They want to be around forever.
Got that puppeteer.
Exactly. And so they are always working behind the scenes. Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney were exactly the same way from Gerald Ford's administration all the way up through George W. Bush's. They're these old white guys that hang around in politics forever pulling strings, and people elect different presidents all the time, wonder, why is nothing changing? Well, nothing behind the curtain is any damn different. It's the same thing. And unfortunately, one of the things that I think a lot of people bought into with Trump when he was running in 2016 was the whole idea of draining the swamp. Well, the first thing Trump did was bring in all of these old Washington hacks that have been scamming and manipulating the system for 20, 30 years.
Which shows
and
that
Roger's
he's
one of them. Right.
Yeah.
And actually Roger Stone is probably one of the reasons that Trump ran in the first place, because they've been friends forever. But anyway, so very recently Roger Stone was pardoned by President Trump on charges that came around during the Mueller investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. And Roger lied to the FBI, and there were some other things. And he was up on a 40-month prison sentence for lying to Congress and witness tampering as a result of that investigation. And so Trump let it go until Roger was already sentenced. The trial had been done. He was found guilty after pleading not guilty. He was sentenced. And right before he was supposed to start serving his sentence, Trump pardoned him. So these guys are still tight, even though Trump doesn't talk about him too much, because Roger is a very he's a fire starter figure. So not only, this is what's so funny to me about, it's not funny, it's ironic. So not only has Roger been backing Trump in wanting more than one terms, but Roger said that there should be full martial law on voting day to prevent any quote unquote voter fraud, including having federal agents monitor people voting in voting stations, in voting booths. You know what that is? By definition, that is fascist. That's why Putin wins every election in Russia by like 80% of the vote.
Oh, but
because you're not allowed to not vote for him.
Yep, and I guarantee you that all the Republicans would be like, well, yeah, that's exactly what we need to make sure we make America great again.
Yeah, and here's a direct quote from Roger. He said, quote, "The ballots in Nevada on election night should be seized by federal marshals and taken from the site. They are completely corrupted. No votes should be counted from the state of Nevada if that turns out to be the provable case. Send federal marshals to Clark County Board of Elections, Mr. President." That is not a democracy. And the thing is, Roger Stone is a really smart guy. He, I think, is inarguably smarter than Trump and a bunch of the other people in the administration. Mm-hmm. He knows what he's doing.
Doesn't mean he's not crooked. Or not a bad person.
Oh my God, no. He's extremely crooked. And honestly, with a lot of people, the smarter they are, the more crooked they are. Mm-hmm. But he knows exactly what he's doing there in planting these seeds that people will then start grabbing onto. So in another, I think I talked about this in one of the introduction episodes I did. What we're going to see moving into November 3rd is all of a sudden, all of these one-liner kind of things are going to start coming from both parties. And it's going to be these slogans that you can say really easily, but have no foundation in anything. And I guarantee you one of them is going to be, oh, well, all the votes have to be counted and tallied on election night. Otherwise, we don't know who won the president. Which is not true. That is not true under the Constitution. It's never been true. That wasn't true when Donald Trump won in 2016. The election wasn't called until like 4 o'clock the following morning. But because they know that there is going to be a shitload of Democratic votes coming through the mail, that they know they want to push that off as much as possible. So we're going to hear all kinds of shit like, oh, actually all the votes have to be in on election day or else they don't count.
Yeah.
Or all the votes have to be in on election day so that the race can be called on the actual November 3rd day, when in fact there's no provision in the Constitution saying that. The Constitution requires that every vote be counted and tallied, regardless how long that takes. So frankly, it would be more constitutional for that process to last until the summer of 2021, where we don't know who the president is, where there is no official president, than having it restricted to only the voting day of November 3rd. That would be more constitutional. So we're going to hear all kinds of shit about this coming out, and there's going to be all kinds of people telling you how to be a patriot. And 100% of the time, they're going to be lying to you.
Yeah. And I would like for anybody listening to this podcast, if you're a Republican, please email in and just tell me if it was Obama doing this, or if Obama was all of a sudden to come back and have a third term, would you be okay with it? If it was Hillary, if it was Bill, if it was anybody that was Democrat, would you be okay with it? Explain to me why or why not. And if you think it's okay for Trump to have a third term, why or why not? And if you don't think it's okay and you have actual brains and you actually stick to the word patriot and being an American, by all means, just explain yourself as to. And if you do believe that it's wrong, then obviously you do not need to support Trump.
Right.
That right there, it tells you what kind of person he is.
Yeah.
So stop supporting him. Do your research. Stop supporting him. And if you do support him still after hearing this, then please explain why.
Yeah. And I don't think that the majority of Republicans would back this if it worked out that way. Because the majority of Republicans are not MAGA hat wearing, like going to boat parades and all that kind of stuff. That's not the majority of them, but it is all of the loud ones. They are all that way. I mean, this is one thing that we're seeing now in the polling. A significant percentage of the Republican Party is senior citizen, is over 65. A lot of them are not on board with this at all. And that is showing in the polling of Trump's likelihood to win this year in 2020. So there's a lot of people, and I think it takes age to have that perspective. People that lived through maybe the Depression, or lived through the Vietnam War, or lived through, Soviet Russia and through the 80s under Reagan. I think it takes that perspective to see how dangerous this is if you're not paying attention, if you're not really following the news and doing that the way that we are. So I think that does moderate it somewhat. But the problem is none of that matters if they go vote for him, no matter what he says anyway. And that's what we'll see. I mean, there is likely to be a significantly lower voter turnout this year anyway, just because of the pandemic. So, I mean, at best, maybe 115 million people in the country vote out of close to 200 million people that are eligible, maybe a little over 200 million. So only about 50% of the country votes, period, anyway. We're looking at that going down dramatically this year.
Yeah.
So the problem is, if only the most rabid people on both sides are the only ones to vote, this is going to be a really screwed up election.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's why we need mail-in voting, which
is happening,
fake, which isn't a new thing, and people need to get that through their heads. Mail-in voting is not a new thing. But not only that, but is it not supposed to be fraud, fake, whatever Trump said? But then you're receiving emails and texts and little things in the mail talking about mail-in voting, and it's from Trump saying to. Yeah,
the last day that I got mail, I had three different election mailers from the Trump campaign telling me to vote by mail.
But it's fake and it's fraud.
It's clueless. And that's something that a lot of people in the campaign and in the White House are trying to get him to shut the hell up saying, because it doesn't make any sense. And they are screwed if people don't mail in vote too. Everybody's screwed if nobody mail in votes, because nobody's going to vote. There's going to be like 40 million people that vote. Mm-hmm. And who the hell knows that? It's really easy to have 40 million assholes that don't know what the hell they're talking about voting. So that's scary, and it's scaring the rank and file Republicans too, because they're forecasting a loss because people are going to not show up to vote, and they're going to take Trump's word that mail-in voting is all fake, and they're just not going
Trump's people are sending out mail saying to mail-in vote.
Yeah, I've got texts from Laura Trump and from Donald Jr. telling me to vote by mail.
Yeah, and
It's
then
so silly.
I'm receiving emails and mail. And if you don't believe it, we can always take a picture of the mail that we receive and post it on the site.
Absolutely. Tons of it. And we don't live in a battleground state either. The state that we're in is supposed to be closer to contested this year, but our state has voted the exact same way for a long time. And that's how much money they're putting into it over here.
Yeah.
Crazy times. And the more crazy stuff like that he says, I'm really curious to see if more people are going to jump on the Roger Stone bandwagon and just wave the fascist flag completely. And if so, we're definitely going to talk about it, because I want to see if this bullshit idea spreads like a virus or not.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, thank you for listening to another episode of the Rogue Patriot podcast. You can always contact us at the Rogue Patriot podcast at gmail.com. All of the episodes are posted on YouTube. There are also videos and other content posted there as well. On YouTube, we are at the Rogue Patriot. Thank you for listening. Send us any ideas that you have for topics, comments, anything like that. Tell us we're full of shit. It's all good. This country is founded on disagreement. So thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.